Hello, all my lovely YouTube viewers. I am so sorry that I have been absent from the YouTube. We have been streaming a ton of tournament content and Master Duel content over on the main channel, and that has pretty much been taking up all of my spare time. But today I said, you know what? I'm gonna make this tier list video that I have been promising them for an extremely long time now. And by extremely long time, I mean like a week, which is a long time for me. And we're going to talk about meta, a Master Duel meta game here. This is the Ryi Report for people that are new. Usually what we do is a power ranking where we go and gather all of the individual tournaments and, you know, give them points and all that. The thing with Master Duel is we're still so early in kind of the, like, what tournament organizers want to do in terms of a meta game. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I think most organizations don't really have a competitive format. I think ours is the closest that you can get to a competitive format in terms of finishing the game in a timely manner, or the tournament in a timely manner. Our normal tournaments are best of 1 Swiss rounds, 7 rounds of Swiss into a top 32 afterwards, depending on what you finally finish. And then our big monthly tournament, it's actually two times a month tournament, so I guess bi-month or bi-weekly tournament, I don't know what you want to call it, every other week tournament. GG Tour is a 2-day event with the best of 3 the whole way through without any best of 1. Pretty much everyone else that does tournaments isn't really doing this style of format, so for now I'm going to keep it contained within DLE until I see some other people start to do it and kind of a normal I guess format becomes a thing, and then we can kind of do power rankings at that point. But for now, the Ryi Report, if you've never watched the Ryi Report, it's usually 90% statistics, 10% personal opinion. This is going to be closer to 80% statistics and 20% personal opinion. I will be giving a lot of my personal takes in this, again, because there isn't a lot of data. There's only the tournaments that we hold, and we can only hold so many in a week before, well, we run out of time in the week. So, you know, there's only so much we could talk about here. So you can see up on the top right all of the meta decks. I have 3 of the tournaments that we held that I casted that were BO1 into best of 3. I don't have the statistics for the GG Tour on here because that was quite a while ago, but I will bring up some key points from that tournament from time to time. But just to kind of keep things consistent, I wanted to talk about kind of one singular meta. Last thing to talk about before we get into this is supposed to be a tier list for competitive play. While you can take these decks into the ladder and you can talk about ladder, the ladder metagame is going to be slightly different. I'll talk about, I still think the same decks are still good, and I'll bring up what decks I think are in ladder and if I think they will change place depending on if it's the ladder or not. I'm ultimately thinking about competitive Master Duel over you know, more casual ranked side of Master Duel. So let's get into it. Number 1 that I brought up with Tri Brigade. I'm talking about all Tri Brigade, talking about Bird Up, talking about Tri Brigade Zoo, Tri Brigade Pure. I just think Tri Brigade is the best deck in the game right now, and it's at the same time not like super oppressive and like dominating everyone. The tier 2 and tier 3 decks can definitely fight with Tri Brigade, but it is no question in my mind. Even in the ladder, I think Tri Brigade is just flat out the best deck right now. It definitely feels like the Shiranui of this game for those that played Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links. You can see pretty much Tri Brigade, and in some fashion, usually Zoo is pretty much always the most topped, and it's always pretty much the most entered as well, usually by a very large margin. You can see here in our second one that we ever did, the Tri Brigade. This is just Tri Brigade Zoo was the most topped, and we didn't even include all of them technically in the overall breakdown. We just kind of pushed them in there, but you could see Tri Brigade, Lyceric, and normal Tri Brigade were still there, so the lead gets even pushed further beyond. This one was close. Virtual World almost came up to them. Emancipator almost came up to them here, but at the end of the day, it's always Tri Brigade on top, and it varies by how much they are on top, but they are always on top. This deck is just super simple to play. It's super simple to play, hard to master, just like most decks. and it's one of those decks where if you do make a mistake, it's not as punishing, and if you're not playing at an optimal level, you could still kind of squeeze by and top with the deck. And if you're a really good player, you know, a lot of this deck comes down to deck building. This deck in all of its variant forms is just a bunch of small engines. The Tri-Brigade engine has like a million starters, right? Your Fractal starter, your Tinky starter, hell, you could even just summon a Nerval and then go into your Almirage, and then boom, you have a starter right there, right? So it's extremely hard to actually brick with this deck. It can go first, it can go second, it can play all the hand traps in the game without, you know, cucking itself. It has space to be maneuverable and very, very strong, and it's one of those decks that even if, like, for example, Drytron gets banned in this game, normal Tri-Brigade is still going to be good, right? Maybe not tier 1 anymore, it's sold tier 1, but it's still very, very powerful in its flexibility, what it can play, etc., etc., etc. So if you want to know how to play Tri-Brigade, I have 2 videos, 2 different variants on them. Go check it out. This deck is amazing, and I think is easily in that tier 1 situation. Tier 2... I should also mention tier 1 for both ladder and tournament play. Tier 2, we have Emancipator and Virtual Worlds. Emancipator is, I think, one of the most underrated decks currently in our metagame. You can always see pretty much from the amount of people that enter, so you can see here 4 Emancipators enter this tournament. 4 topped. Amazing conversion rate. You can see here, Emancipators, there were, looks like 3 entered. How many topped? Look again, Emancipators, 2 topped. Again, how many do we have here? 7 that entered overall, 3 topped. Not as good, but still pretty good. I believe in the GG Tour we had, there was, I think, a 14 that entered, and I think 7 or 8 of them ended up topping. Emancipator always has a very, very, very good conversion rate. They have fantastic... board setups, they have fantastic negates, they can cause a Buster Whelp lockout, or Buster Sword Destruction lockout or whatever from the extra deck. They basically can search for the Nibiru. They have a monster negate very early. A lot of these decks have to kind of build towards a monster negate, but having something like the Kawaki Guardian can help them avoid hand traps very, very easily, so they're very easy to get in there with their hand trap negation. The biggest problem is they're a little bit slower to start, right? If you've ever watched the streams, you could see like the first normal summon gets negated from an Emancipator. It's kind of hard for them to push through, and listen, Block Dragon's broken, all that's broken, but against Max C, if they get hit with Max C and then they don't have a way to answer that, they can't just make the Emancipator board, right? The final Emancipator board with the negates and the special summon lockout and the bounces, they can't create that. Because there's just no way. If they try to, they would give their opponent like 20 cards, and their opponent would just be able to play through whatever negates that they set up. It's near impossible. So I think because we are definitely kind of in that Max C metagame, the Max C is just warping everything around it. Decks like Emancipator that are spamming a whole bunch of cards, they aren't going to really be able to do anything, you know? So I think that's why they're kind of in that tier 2 spot rather than that tier 1 spot. I think if anything ever happens to Max C, I actually do unironically believe Emancipator could take on full power Tri-Brigade as like a competitor for that tier 1 position. But for now, I think it's safer to say it's tier 2. Virtual World is an interesting deck because it's kind of different from Tri-Brigade, right? And Emancipator. They're a lot more bricky than most competitive decks, and for the most part, you're going to need 2 cards to really get going. You know, 1 card isn't really going to, you know, pop off. Like, you know, Tri-Brigade, they get Fractal, and then they just go into their whole combo, and you're like, whoa, what happened? Emancipator, they get their 1 Analyzer or whatever, and then they just have a full board Drytrons. A lot of these meta decks, right? 1 card, and they're just gone into this insane board because it combos off so hard. Virtual World doesn't really do that, and while it's a meme that Virtual World is just VFD Turbo, it's kind of true. At the same time, if you're able to deal with the VFD or King of Calamity Dragons, or just stop them from ever creating it in the first place, the Virtual World matchup becomes significantly easier. Now, that's not the only thing you need to be careful of. They still have powerful tools like Shin, being able to send cards to the banish pile instead of the graveyard from the field is very strong against certain decks, especially some of the more tier 3-esque decks. you got to show them respect, you know. They will banish all your cards, and then you won't have access to any of them. Chuche being able to pop on demand is very, very easy to set up, and it helps them at the same time. And yeah, just you know, it's one of those decks where yes, VFD is very unfair, and yes, they are the fastest at making it, but they do have other options to actually win duels with. Granted, they don't have a reason to try to win without them because it's so easy to make the VFD dragon and stop your opponent from playing the game altogether. But those options do exist. It's a little bricky, but in a best of 3 situation where you can choose to go first or second, you're always going to have that turn 1 VFD, and it's really easy, even if your opponent has hand traps, to still set it up. And that one card is just so powerful. You know, it's an on-demand floodgate. It's enough to pretty much carry this deck into tier 2. I think without it, they'd probably drop. They'd still be relevant. I still think they'd be like a tier 3 deck. But yeah, that one card pretty much puts Virtual World on its on its back and just carries it to tier 2. It's very, very, very strong. It's won a couple of our tournaments, I think, and I think Damage Step Thursday was even a mirror match between Virtual Worlds, and again, you can see them having pretty good representation here in the top cut still, and entering as well. Let's talk about tier 3. Tier 3 is the one where I kind of went back and forth on a bunch of them because a lot of them I think are on here because of the best of 1. But at the same time, what I really focused on was if you did well into converting into top cut and then did well in top cut when I kind of looked at the tier 3 decks. And we're just going to talk about them in order. Prank Kids is a very consistent deck, you know, being able to constantly choose what card. You just need any of your Prank Kid starters, right? And you play so many of them, and then you have your link one, and then you go into the rest of your combo. It's pretty much guaranteed that you get the rest of your combo every single time from then on at that point. Prank Kids, I think, is one of those decks that is kind of hard to pilot in a way. There's a lot that a lot of people try to bring into the deck that they can do, but it's not really going to make the deck more competitive, and a lot of people just waste time on playing things like polymerization and stuff like that in the deck, when if you just play it as a pure, you know, kind of a control deck, try to make that battle butler and then Raigeki twice on your opponent's turn, and then next turn you can focus on trying to get like more negates up and stuff like that. The deck's just really, really, really good at doing that. And it's also really hard to play the grind game against Prank Kid decks because time is such a big resource in Master Duel. A lot of duels do go to time. Prank Kids always have the advantage in time, right? They can heal their life points, they can burn your life points without actually touching you. So if you do go to time and try to go to the grind game with this deck, they are going to beat you. So we'll see how time rules evolve as Master Duel tournaments continue, but I think you do have to show respect to the Prank Kids. They did just win yesterday's tournament as posting of this video. Their actual overall stats in terms of topping and whatnot aren't the most fantastic, but I did take into account that they do go far. When they do top, they do go far in tournaments, and they do very, very, very well in the ladder format. So there you go. Next two, I think, might be a little surprising to people: Eldritch and Drytron. Let's talk about both. Eldritch is a deck that, if we're talking about ladder, is probably tier 1 or tier 2, right? Because a lot of people don't prepare back row removal, even though they know Eldritch is rampant on there. Eldritch, because we have best of 1 Swiss, is able to convert actually kind of well. When you look at top cut, you can see as the graphics kind of pass you by, you get quite a bit of Eldritch that ends up in the top cut. What's interesting about them, though, is these Eldritch players that are able to actually make it to the top cut are actually performing relatively well. I think a couple days ago, even, we had 2 Eldritches in the top 4 in a best of 3 scenario, like not the best of 1, right? That means they went from top 32, top 16, top 8, all the way to get there. Now, does that make Eldritch an amazing meta-defining deck? I'm gonna be honest with you. I think if the entire tournament is best of 3, it's hard to justify that Eldritch is like a really, really good deck. But at the same time, if the reason that's happening is because people would be putting anti-Eldritch cards in their side deck, and isn't that kind of the definition of being meta, that people are preparing for you and they have to put cards in their deck for you? You know, that's kind of the definition of being meta, you know what I mean? So the fact that people have to respect them, the fact that they are topping, the fact that they are even going further while they top, it kind of just shows the strength of Eldritch. But at the same time, because they're so easily countered in just the deck building process, I don't think it's fair to say anything higher than tier 3 for them. But in ladder specifically, I do think this deck is unironically like tier 1, tier 2. It's like tier 1.5. So really, really strong deck. Drytron, let's talk about Drytrons. Drytrons are the king of best of 1, because if they go first, they basically win. So it's very, very hard to beat them at that point. However, if they go first and their opponent is playing a million hand traps, which is what Tri Brigade do, 2 solid negates is all you really need to shut down an average Drytron hand, right? Like Apollosa is sometimes just an FTK against Drytron because they need their monster effects, right? Without their monster effects, the deck doesn't really do a whole lot. Even the spells and stuff, they just set up for more monster effects. So if they never get to their negate board to begin with, they're extremely easy to break. But we've all been against the Drytron tier 0 board where they just play their hand, they have a million negates, they're sending Ava, they have so many cards in hand. It gets kind of hard and rough to play against them. Of course, they also have Herald in their hand, so if you do try to hand trap them, they can stop you. In best of 3, because you get to choose going first, second, or third, or first or second when you lose. If you lose to a Drytron in game 1, in game 2 you go first, make sure they never set up, and then game 3 you side in all of your hand trap cards to try and prevent them from creating the tier 1 board again, to try and just stop them. I think just the default power of this deck, pretty much saying no, just the raw strength when they do set up, and them basically causing the feeling of coin flip. It's kind of like Virtual World, but at a less degree. They just deserve to be in tier 3. On top of that, again, same with Eldritch, they are actually, when they do convert into the top 32, they actually are winning these best of 3 tournament, or best of 3 games to go high in the tournament. I believe the furthest we've ever seen them was actually in the finals of a tournament twice, if I'm not mistaken, in BO3. So I think there's a certain level of skill to try and play the deck in a best of 3 environment, and watching those players perform on that deck is very, very, very strong. Now there's a couple of decks that aren't on here that are kind of, I'm keeping my eye on them. I'm not confident enough to tier them quite yet, but you do see them in every tournament, and I guess I can kind of go over a couple of those. Sky Striker is a big one. I'm sure a lot of people are like, oh, but isn't Sky Striker really, really good? Sky Striker usually gets a lot of entries, but doesn't convert very well, unfortunately, and when it does convert, they pretty much never go far in the tournaments. So I'm not a big believer in Sky Striker as of right now. I am keeping my eye on them to see if that changes, if people start doing well with them. I'll definitely report on that as soon as I see it, but based on the small amount of data that I have and just my own personal opinion, I don't see them doing well in terms of converting to the top cut. The other one is Thunder Dragon. Thunder Dragon is one that's been kind of on people's brains a lot. What's going on with Thunder Dragon? They're at like full power in this game. What are they doing? Same scenario as Sky Striker, but even worse. I would actually say that I don't even know if Thunder Dragon's necessarily rogue. We have seen a couple pop off and go far in tournaments, but it's usually like one person. It's very rarely like a large section of people. Again, keeping my eye on it, but I think Thunder Dragon just relies too much on like Buster Lock and stuff like that, which other decks like Emancipator just do overall better. And then I think the last one people want to talk about is Dinos. I think Dinos is a rogue deck, just like Sky Strikers. I think they can go far in tournaments, and I think they can win tournaments. They have won tournaments, but ultimately it's just a kind of simplistic deck that's a little bit easier to beat. Of course, you can't flip down Link monsters, so the big boss monster isn't as good as it used to be. And there's just a lot of issues with Dinos that they can't necessarily do anything about, right? They are a bit slower than the other meta decks. They are while they have a lot of useful tools, their combo is very easy to disrupt with their field spell and getting the Babysaurus popped from the deck. Anything to stop that field spell pretty much spells disaster for them. And it can be a little bricky. Sometimes they just go into Baba Bosca and just say, okay, we're going to stall until we have our combo, and then we're going to play the game. So while they did win tournaments, I do believe there's still more of a rogue level for the dinos. And that's it. That is the Ryi Report for the metagame. Apps, I am more than open for people to give me their opinions down in the comments below. As always, we host these tournaments weekly and our big tournaments monthly. So definitely join the Discord if you'd like to play. If you highly disagree with something that I said, bring the deck into the tournaments. Prove me wrong. I always like being proved wrong because that's just more Yu-Gi-Oh to talk about. Why did this deck do well versus why did this deck do bad? Blah, 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 blah. I'm not so much concerned of being correct on the tier list as I am getting accurate data for the tier list. So the more data you guys provide me, the better I can parse it, and then I can better report back to you guys. And that's it. I hope you guys are enjoying Master Duel. Till next time, peace out.